Hello, everybody. My name is Coalspace, and welcome to the Coalspace XP podcast. Yes, we are back, and we are opening the podcast to a multitude of different topics. But today, I thought it would be a good topic to dive into for you guys because, something that we've been working on for about over a year now, off and on, with the channel, and we've done several different things with it. A Minecraft fantasy world is something we've been building for quite a while, and I kind of wanted to explore fantasy worlds. Fantasy worlds, what makes them feel so alive? And fantasy worlds are something that a lot of us can attach to and enjoy in our own special ways. And that's for various reasons. And with that, that's kind of the episode idea today. We're going to talk about how fantasy worlds feel alive to better understand how we can do things in our Minecraft fantasy world project and kind of explore the different ways that when you play a game or you read a book or anything in general, where it's a fantasy world setting, how does it become so alive? How do you connect with that story or that world in a certain way? So some fantasy worlds feel like places you may visit in real life, and some feel like places that have existed long before you had arrived. And that poses the question, why do some worlds stay in our heads for so many years? Games like Skyrim, Zelda, Undertale, games off of the top of my head that I've played that feel very alive. Dark Souls, Minecraft. Minecraft really is a fantasy world, but you don't feel like it's more of a sandbox. Elden Ring is a great example. Red Dead Redemption's not really a fantasy world. It's more of a, I don't know if you'd call that a fantasy world, but that's the game we're playing right now, so that's why I'm saying that. But yeah, like, why do these worlds stay in our head for so many years? I mean, if you've played Skyrim, you know what some of those locations are by heart. A lot of you. If you've played games with like Minecraft, you know what the Nether is. You know what the end is. Those are all places in those worlds that are so memorable to the players that played it or the players that read a book about it. Hogwarts is part of a fantasy book series, Harry Potter. Hogwarts is a fantasy location, and people are connected to that so deeply. So it's interesting to see how places like you go into Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, the Shire. It's maybe a place that they actually filmed, but they made it it's part of a fantasy world. So, and a story. So they pulled things from real world and they put the best parts of that maybe in like their fantasy world, because they're using, sometimes in fantasy worlds I feel like we're building parts of what we've seen in our lives or just in general things that we want to see in the world that we live in. So I feel like they feel more alive when they have things that you can connect with. That's pretty much why fantasy worlds are so loved and adored in certain games, because it feels like it's alive. It feels like it's not just do this, do that, do that. No, the game feels like it's alive, Sitting around a fire is like something a lot of people like to do. If you do that in a game, it feels like, you're doing it in real life in a way. Worlds feel alive when you see things in the world that looks like something had already happened and you missed it. So like ruins, old wars that have happened, ancient kingdoms, civilizations that have been abandoned or forgotten. That would be a good one. Myths, legends, things that you find, so lore, for example, in the world that makes it more livable. It makes it really exciting. So when the world has had some time on its belt and people play in that world, it does feel more alive because it feels like it was there before you were around, or even, and it'll be there long after. So, for example, if you've ever played Dark Souls, or I've dabbled in Elden Ring. I want to do a full series for you guys whenever I can. In Elden Ring, I haven't really played too much of Dark Souls, but I played it a little bit when I was a kind of like a teenager. Around that age, I played Dark Souls 2, just like a little bit, tiny bit, not really much of anything. The one thing I noticed in those games are they tell the story with the environment. They tell the story like you don't really, some games they just tell you, with dialogue or books, and like just tell you flat out what's going on. You catch on. With Dark Souls games or Elden Ring, you kind of get into the game and you feel like everything is already the way it is, You feel like this world has existed long before you, and you're just coming in as just some Joe Schmo, random guy, and you're just taking your place in the world. And that's what makes it feel so alive, because it feels like it's been there long before you were even there. And that's something that's really important. They tell the story with the environment that you find in the game. They don't tell the story with words more so. They tell it with the environment. And they more show. They don't tell you everything that's happening, which is a good way to tell a story. But you can also do the show, don't tell kind of story building. And that's just as effective. Sometimes it's even more effective if you're someone who doesn't want to listen to a bunch of talking or anything like that, just like this podcast episode. But if you are, that's okay too. One thing that I think is really cool about games in general, when they have a fantasy world, or movies, it can be movies too, in general, because as you know, this is the newest podcast episode, and we are opening it up to everything. We're going to talk about more than just games on this podcast, just because I thought, hey, I want to talk about more than, I just want to talk about stuff that interests me, and I want to entertain you guys. So I'm going to talk about more than just games and board games, but I love games and board games, don't get me wrong. So we will still have episodes dedicated to that. But when normal people exist, or in the game world, as you call it, NPCs, usually, I think that's the term, fantasy worlds feel really real when you see people going about their day, honestly. I love it when games have seasons and like they have like holidays or like random events going on and you're not even like triggering it. That is really cool. I love that. When games do that, I feel like, oh my gosh, this is like, I'm going to miss it. It's like the fear of missing out. Special foods, that'll be a podcast episode in and of itself. Is like game foods, probably. I would love to do an episode about that, but just food, very iconic foods in games that you can remember just because you're like, oh, that's so unique, that's cool. Specific jobs, I know that there are some fantasy worlds where they made up jobs for that fantasy world, and like that is cool. It's different, it has its own identity in that way. Religion, you got clothing, they make their own music. This is all cultural stuff that you can add to a fantasy world that makes it feel very alive. I just punched my microphone, sorry. And then I think a lot of games and movies like to use markets, like trading markets. That's a good one, because that just makes, if you've ever been to a real market, it feels so lively, and there's a huge sense of community, and that is really cool. Like, you want to be a part of that because it's fun, you feel like you're part of something. And it's the routines and the cities, like, and the differences between them. When each city has a kind of a different culture or a different vibe, and you have like a city that's kind of edgy and evil, Or you have a city that's really nice and bright, and every day is usually nice, and the markets and the people. Like, that adds really important aspects to any fantasy world. So, and like I said originally, I'm kind of doing this episode to kind of better understand and also get more ideas on how we can build our Minecraft fantasy world, where we're gonna be like, we're just building like everything in that world. So this is kind of tied to that. But if this is from the Cold Space XP podcast. So if you're watching this on Spotify, just to let you know, it is on the Cold Space YouTube channel. We have a series where we're building a Minecraft fantasy world, just from like whatever we're doing, whatever. So that's kind of why the inspiration of this episode is coming from, and I thought it'd be fun. So, and then just like random conversations. Sometimes when I'm playing a game or watching a movie in general, like, and when it's a fantasy world, sometimes I do like listening just to the side characters of the NPCs, just talking. Like, it's cool to hear what kind of conversations they have. Sometimes they'll say things in a really interesting way, and I think that's cool. I think the main thing that you gotta have with a fantasy world, it's gotta feel like very alive, and it's gotta be like an ecosystem in of itself. It's gotta be something where it feels like it's all connected, but it's all different. That's the best way I can see it. And that's how I would say for it. Weather is a great way to do that. Creatures and animals just doing their little things that they do. Having nice, just nice music is really important. I think my favorite games that I eventually will play for you guys, that I played when I was younger, which whenever I do play them, I'll tell you guys. But Fable and Fate, they had really, really good music. It was like the music was so relaxing, and I think that's a big thing in games. Honestly, if you can get really good music in a game, perfect. It's great. Just places that feel dangerous, like, ooh, I don't want to go there because I'll get attacked. That's a really important thing in fantasy worlds. Or places that you're like, oh, if I go here, I'm safe. That's a really cool thing to do too. Another thing too. Another thing I think is really cool in fantasy worlds is when the creator of a fantasy world, or whoever is making that fantasy world, if they start making secrets about the world. I think this is a really big draw in any fantasy world, because when you have a fantasy world where there's secrets, there's questions, and they're not answered, it's like it's a mystery, and people love deep diving into that stuff. So when you're creating a world, you got to leave bits and pieces of what was. Like, things existed without you even being there. And that, like, just being more cryptic, saying these things, having locations that don't make sense in the fantasy world, that's cool. Like, for instance, what comes off the top of my head in the scene of the Lord of the Rings with the three trolls and Gandalf and Bilbo with the dwarves. When he turned them to stone, they didn't leave that spot. They're there. They're basically statues now. And I'm sure that anyone who crossed paths with these stone trolls after they had left was just they paused. They stopped and paused for a moment, because they were like, what are three trolls doing right here? They're all stone. Like, what happened here? And if you're not in that group with Gandalf and the dwarves and Bilbo, you don't know. And that's what's so cool. Even in the first Lord of the Rings movie, Bilbo tells the story to the children in the Shire, because not everybody knew that story. And anybody who crossed paths with that location just went, I wonder what happened here. But they don't know the story. And that's what makes it more interesting. That's what makes the draw come in. Things long forgotten, dormant beasts and ancient beings that are so powerful. That's a really big draw I see in fantasy games and worlds. An ancient being slumber, or something that is too powerful for anybody to handle. Like, that is a big thing, honestly. And that's a cool, like, that's a cool way to build your fantasy world. Um, another, and obviously, some of these we can't implement in the Minecraft fantasy world, but we can take bits and pieces and we could put it in our Minecraft fantasy world, because that is kind of why we're exploring all this stuff. We're just kind of talking about it, but also thinking about how we can build it into a Minecraft fantasy world. And if you're building a fantasy world, or if you have anything that you like about fantasy worlds, let me know in a comment, either in Spotify or YouTube. If you're listening or watching, just let me know. Write a little comment saying what you like in a fantasy world, or what you notice the most. A world feels alive when it reacts to you. Now, I say this because when the players do things in games, I think that is a big deal, because then you feel like you're in it. You're in that actual fantasy world. Like, you see, there's a fly. You see your effects that you do. That creates attachment immediately. So if towns change, if reputations, like right now with our Red Dead Redemption 2 playthrough, there's an honor system. So if I do bad things, I'm frowned upon. If I do good things, I have good honor. That's interesting. In Fable, they did that, where you grow horns, I think, and then you have a halo if you're good. So things like that, or the NPCs making comments about if you're good or bad, like, because they know. That's interesting. And that matters to people emotionally too when they play a world, or they see that in a fantasy world. But yeah, and the one thing that's a very, very underrated, I think, in fantasy worlds, it's so important too, is this music. Like, even if it's nothing, like silence is an interesting use. You can use silence, anything, just normal, yeah. Like, one of the probably most iconic ones that I can think of is the Minecraft music. When you listen to that Minecraft music, at least there's a version of it that's like dun 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 dun. I don't remember it all, but that one's like, it puts you to sleep. And I would say some of the fantasy worlds, like, oh my god, my microphone, hello, god, okay, Jesus, hello, just knocked over my whole microphone. Okay, hello, okay, there we go. All right. Okay. All right. So, like I said, some of the fantasy worlds that I played growing up were like Skyrim. And what else? There was Minecraft. Yep. There was Lord of the Rings. Willow. I liked the movie Willow. That was really cool. I liked how that world felt when I watched the movie. There's a lot of fantasy worlds out there. Harry Potter, Hogwarts, very comforting. So many fantasy worlds in games and movies and just books, anything. It's inspired me to try to make a Minecraft fantasy world. It's inspired me to possibly make my own fantasy world and write maybe a book or do video, like make content about that. So these things, they got me through emotionally in life because, like, and everybody connects to something else differently, but fantasy matters because sometimes life is hard and life can be very challenging, but fantasy can give you a light at the end of the tunnel and get you through that. It's not it can be an escape, but it's not an escape. It can teach you things in ways that you don't even feel like you're being taught. That's what I think I love most about fantasy. What I love most about fantasy is the fact that I can give people lessons and personal insights and wisdom through stories, and they have no idea that I'm trying to do that. That's what I like about fantasy. Because when you watch fantasy and you see how it goes, I think sometimes I think sometimes the creator is trying to give us some kind of wisdom. And I think that's why it matters emotionally. Yes, it's very happy. It's fun. It makes you dream, which is important. It makes you inspired. And to me, that's what I want to do in what I create. I want to create that sense of wonder. I want to create, something that can inspire people in a way that they do something for themselves, or it makes them happy, because that's the most important thing in life, I think. It's just doing something that you feel like is good to the world. So yeah, I think that's why we're making our Minecraft fantasy world. Honestly, we're doing it because we're making a living world in Minecraft. And and it's not stopping there. Like, I want to make some sort of fantasy world, whether it be like a just a book or just something that's different. And I think that's a good thing. So that's, for me, fantasy worlds got me through one of the hardest parts of my life. So I did, like, I look back, they don't entertain us. They do a lot more than that emotionally. So I think that's why people fixate on them so much, is because it's not just an escape. It's an emotional connection to the world. I think that's where it is. That's where they feel maybe heard. That's where they maybe feel like they can do things and in general, or they see that this happens, so it gives them hope for themselves, and that's another reason why. So, I mean, when I was going through a very, very difficult time in my life, and I was learning how to walk again, and I was trying to do everything I could to get back on my feet and just be able to feel normal. Fantasy worlds showed me that, to appreciate what I had, but also that there will be better days coming ahead. And in those moments where you feel weak or desperate, things like that, they really help people. And that's and I realized that, and then I realized, okay, well, I need to start making stuff, because my whole life I've been writing stuff on papers or just making fun fantasy worlds whether that be for my son when we talk, I tell him late night stories, and I'll make up a story in a fantasy world. But sorry, that was a little hard, but yeah, it's important. It really is, and that's why I'm going to continue to make stuff with not just the Minecraft fantasy world, but the book that we're working on, which I am on chapter 8 now. We've written 7 chapters. I'm excited to show you guys it. It's not so much a fantasy world. It's more just the genre is more adventure, mystery, I would say. But there's definitely stories that I want to tell that would be more on the fantasy side of things, because I think that is really, really cool. So that's why I think it's important. But I have some interesting questions for you, the viewer, whether you're watching, hello, whatever you're listening, hello. What fantasy world would you live in? First question. What game or movie, it doesn't have to be a game, it can be a book too. What fantasy world what felt most alive to you? Which one? And you guys can comment these answers, by the way. Just comment section. What ruins or locations stuck with you? What places, whether they were ruins or just a random location, it can be a big location, a small little corner of the world, or a little place. What stuck with you the most? And this one's more of a gaming related, but do graphics matter when you're playing for immersion? Do graphics matter? Do they? I don't think they do. I'm going to answer that one. Do they? I don't think so. Graphics, I don't think they matter for immersion, personally, because I've played games that did not have the best graphics, and I was very immersed in those. I mean, I played like Undertale. That game is not known for its graphics. Like, it is not. It is just a game, and it's really cool. So I don't think you need good graphics in the game world to have immersion. So, with that being said, that is about all I had for the episode today. And I want to leave you with a thought saying the best fantasy worlds don't just entertain us. They make us feel like there are mysteries somewhere out there. There are still things yet we have not found. And I think that is a really big, important piece of the whole fantasy building process that we have to remember. I may do more fantasy related episodes on the podcast. We shall see. But I really just wanted to do an episode today about talking about fantasy worlds, because you guys have been asking in comments, and we have been building this Minecraft fantasy world, so it felt like the perfect time to put an episode about what makes a fantasy world good or great. So, with that being said, thank you all for listening to the podcast or watching it, whichever you did. If you're listening for Spotify, please rate this podcast and follow the CoolSpace XP podcast for more of my episodes. We'll be doing 1 episode a month for now, but if you guys seem to enjoy it, we will do probably 1 episode a week. But for now, since we're doing a lot of things at once, and it's about as consistent as I can be with the podcast, because I'm doing all the other stuff on top of it, we will do 1 episode a month. So with that being said, thank you. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already for more content. And I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Yeah, that's it. That's it. Thank you all so much for listening and watching. And I will see you all in the next episode of the CoolSpace XP podcast. Bye for now.